Tim, welcome. Welcome to the podcast, man. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining. I have some music for you.
Oh, this is a
This is
throwback.
it. This is a throwback just for you. I know you're a sports fan, so I asked our mutual friends, what is Tim like? Is he still into these things? I don't know. I'll ask.
That era of the '90s Chicago Bulls, that'll always be in my heart. It'll never go away.
You still follow the Bulls?
I do, not as
Okay.
not as
Not as
closely as
not
I
as much.
probably should, but yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Alrighty. So I've been following you, your career specifically, especially since we worked together in the past and at UL Underwriters Laboratories, and you left on to bigger and better things. But just to go back to the beginning, you were literally an intern, and now you're a global R&D manager at Littelfuse. So if you could walk us back towards the beginning, even just to the college level first, and you chose to go into electrical engineering. Why did you choose that in the first place at UIC? And any favorite classes that you recall that really stuck with you?
Yeah, wow, what a journey it's been for me. I could tell you it's gone through different paths throughout my career, and I wouldn't have done it any other way. But I could tell you for sure, I never would have planned it this way either. And that's probably what a lot of people can say in their careers is I'm definitely an example of that. If I rewind back to my days in high school, getting ready to go to college, boy, I had a lot to choose from. Being in high school, being a senior, there's a lot to think about in terms of your future, what kind of job role you want to have. And for me, it was very clear. I was always gravitating towards the sciences and math subjects. Wanted nothing to do with humanities or social sciences. So that that made it very clear for me that science and math is where my forte is. But even within that realm, there's a lot of options to go through. And originally, I was really interested in going into the medical route, mostly because I have a lot of family members that are in the medical industry, and they tried to sway my decision into that route. But I also found it interesting to be able to work with people on a daily basis. At that time, I wasn't as, let's say, extroverted as I may be now, but it was something I aspired to be. I wanted to hone people skills and get that part of working with a bigger group in my skill set, and I felt that being in the medical profession would help. So I fast forward a little bit into applying for colleges, and obviously I wanted to stay local. That was one key thing for me. It just helped having family members nearby to support me throughout my college journey. So UIC was one of the front runner schools that I definitely wanted to go to. And at the time, they had a pretty good engineering program, and engineering was definitely one of the areas that I had a passion for. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved taking apart, toys, especially cars. And, one day I wanted to be able to build stuff that goes into cars. One of my favorite shows growing up actually was Knight Rider with
Nice.
David Hasselhoff.
Nice.
So, I always dreamed of being the engineer that could help build such a futuristic vehicle, whether it's on the mechanical side or the electrical side. So that was always kind of in my mind. And I applied for electrical engineering. That was one area where my father helped me, gave me some advice, saying, there's a lot more industries and content out there that's going from mechanical to electrical. And at the time, I thought, well, I don't really see it. I still see a lot of mechanical engineering. I still see a lot of civil and chemical. But he kind of said, trust me on this one. There's a lot more electronics and gadgets of the sort that will be taking over our lives. And my God, he was absolutely right. It's been quite a journey over the last, couple of decades, ever since I went through the start of that journey. And definitely now with what you see with electric vehicles, I feel like this was definitely the right path to take. There's been a lot of changes in the electrical engineering world, and I still see a lot more changes to come.
Gotcha. So when you were talking about Knight Rider and imagining working on the car. Were you not imagining being Michael Knight himself and driving the car, or you were
I
under the
was.
car mechanic? Okay, both. Okay.
Both. Obviously, being the guy behind
Yeah.
the building the car would be great, but I definitely wanted to be the guy on screen as well. And I thought it'd be unique to be the guy that can do both, that can actually be
Mm,
the action hero and also work on the car at the same time. That hasn't
gotcha.
happened yet.
And so at USC when you were taking and doing undergrad, any special classes that piqued your interest that this is the kind of field that I want to be in, or was it basically everything and all of it?
No, actually, electrical engineering, as you know, it's a wide variety field to go into because there's classes that cover, radio communications, electronics, power systems like the power lines for utilities. There's so many different paths to go into. But for me, what I really gravitated towards really early on was microelectronics. That was something that
Mm,
I had a lot of interest in. I liked radios. I liked, kind of like those toys where you can have remote controls to run cars. And I just always wanted to know what made those circuits drive, what made them go. So I really latched onto electronics, and the two courses where I felt that I had the most background in that or learned a lot in it was electronics one and two at UIC, because that to me was the first time I had a course where I could take fundamentals like circuit analysis and twist that into actually building a circuit and starting from scratch, taking building blocks of how to, take a problem and solve it using some of the discrete components that we had in our toolbox. And I found that really interesting. And later on, when I was able to tack on programming and other courses, it really helped put the picture together. But electronics was the core
mm.
of the foundation of my journey in electrical engineering.
Awesome. And then your first internship began at Continental. How did that come about? Was that like a career fair thing, or did you find them separately?
Yeah, actually, so I was in the summer in between my junior and senior year. So I actually had one more semester left for my senior year. And I had actually gone out and tried to apply to several companies because one thing that I knew I needed to have before I entered the workforce was to have some work experience
Mm,
in the engineering field before I become a full-blown engineer. And that's become more and more important as time has gone on. I applied through career fairs. This job at Motorola came about through a recruiter, actually. So I had applied through a few different career fairs, and one of the recruiters found my resume, contacted me, and said, "Hey, we've got this position open in Deer Park, Illinois." And I said, "Yeah, let's talk more about it." Interestingly enough, at the time, the company was the automotive division of Motorola. Most people don't
mm,
know that Motorola had an automotive division that worked on a few sensors that go into the vehicles. And that's who I got hired on by during that summer. Little did I know that they were getting acquired by Continental, the big
mm,
German automotive tier one company. So I had my first experience as an intern in terms of significant change in the
oh,
workplace. So that was quite a eye-opening experience for me. I actually quite enjoyed it because it was kind of a culture shift within the company, which most people work a few years within a company before they get to experience that. I got to experience that a few months into my job. So I really learned the lesson early on about uncertainty and how your team may have to shift or pivot into
mm.
different directions. And that I found very interesting.
And they kept your internship going. They didn't like say, "Sorry, Tim, we got acquired. You're out." But you
They
just kept
did.
going.
They
Did you
did.
have the
Yeah.
same manager, and same team in your local area, like the other interns, etc., or did that change as well?
It changed a little bit. So
Okay.
my manager that had hired me actually had left the company during that transition, but I was still kept with the same core group of employees. So there was an engineering manager at the time. I was hired on by a program manager who was more on the business side, but I stuck around with the engineering manager and he kept me on the team. The
Mm,
thing that changed though for our team was we originally were working on MEMS gyroscopes that go into vehicles for stability control. We quickly had to pivot to a different type of sensor, and we went to the high pressure sensor, usually for fluids in the combustion engine type of vehicle system. And that was mostly because, in any kind of integration of companies, two companies come together and they look at, okay, who has the better technology, who has the better design,
Mm.
who has the better opportunity for gaining market. And Continental decided, with the inertial sensors, the gyroscopes, they had a better design. They wanted to go with their design, but they had a need for high pressure sensors. So they moved our team into that area. So had to quickly learn two different areas within a matter of months, which was quite fun, actually.
Nice. And did you not want to stay with Continental and you moved to UL as your first full-time job? What was that decision like?
Yeah.
Like
Well,
staying
actually,
with
it
or
was
or
sure.
good.
Yeah. So it was actually kind of a forced decision. So as I mentioned
Mm.
earlier, I had one more semester left at school before I could enter the workforce as a full-time student. So I
Mm.
always had told the Motorola slash Continental team that my intent is to come full-time to Continental. At the time, there was a lot of reorg occurring, as the two companies integrated. So actually, my team that I worked with was being reassigned to different divisions. Some were unfortunately
Mm.
let go, others were reassigned. They liked my abilities, but they did not have a position open for me. So
Oh,
I went to school, I finished up my last semester, but they had no full time position open for me. And they tried to find other homes for me within the company, but the company was in a period of kind of downsizing a bit.
mm.
So I had another lesson of, okay, I've got to find a job real quick in my first dive into the into the workforce, which was good, and I learned a good lesson about networking and the power of the network that you have. So a good friend of
Yeah,
mine at
yeah.
UIC actually had started work at UL about 6 months before I graduated. And I reached out to him and I said, look, I see UL is quite an expansive company. It's growing quickly. At the time that I applied, there were divisions that were growing 20+%. They just needed staff to help that fuel that growth. So there were opportunities at UL. So I asked him, could you pass along my resume to some of the recruiters there? And lo and behold, I get an interview. The fit was very good, and I got that full time position starting out as a junior engineer at UL.
And how was the interview process for you? Pretty straightforward, pretty smooth.
Fairly straightforward, yeah. I've gone through several interview processes now in my
Mm.
career, and I'd have to say that the one at UL was very smooth, especially for
Mm.
the junior engineers coming in. You meet with the HR lead for one round, you meet with the section manager, and it's typically a small group like that, two or three individuals, and a decision is made there. And because it was a junior engineer role, an entry
Mm.
level engineer role, there wasn't much that they really required in terms of experience. Experience was a plus, but they
Mm.
wanted to look at, what is your kind of behavioral identity. They'll ask you questions about, how you would behave in this type of situation. So they wanted to see more of a cultural fit, because technical skills can be learned on the job, and that was a great fit for me, and it was very smooth indeed.
Very cool. So now you are at UL. You spent about 6.5 years there. So what was that career progression like, and any moments or memorable moments that were really helpful to you in that career transition between that you can recall?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the one thing that I always kind of call back upon when I talk to junior engineers, even in my career now, is that the job at UL was a great job in terms of teaching you end-to-end ownership of project management. That was kind of the baseline, the foundation of my professional training, I would say. There's always the technical side, but in every role you go into, there's a few key skills that are transferable to other jobs. I'd say project management and ownership of your projects really was something that I learned at UL. Really from the beginnings of, you're the one and only interface to an external customer. So you have to own a little bit of sales and marketing. You have to wear that hat. You're also the engineer working on the technical work and doing testing and writing up reports. You have to own that piece as well. And sometimes your customer service, if you're not fast enough or
Mm.
somebody internally in the chain is not fast enough or made mistakes, you're the first one that the client calls, and you have to have that customer service hat on and make sure that you're providing the best level of service to that customer so that they wish to come back and utilize your services. So all of
Yeah.
that together really gave me a broad perspective.
Yeah, yeah. So when I was there as well, I think what we all had to learn quickly was how to be the customer service representative and talk with, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies right off the bat. So how was that experience for you coming in, very technical side, a little bit of
Yeah.
internship in the middle, and then dealing with these massive customers, multinational companies? It was very jarring for me. I don't know
Yeah,
about you.
same for me. It was nerve-wracking to say the least. I was really bad at talking to people. I mean, I was a classic engineer, right? I could talk to nerds like me, but talking to an engineering manager or a quality manager or even a business manager on the other side of the phone, oh, it was nerve-wracking. And real quickly, I learned the lessons of you have to just gain confidence in what you do, and over time and with repetition you learn those soft skills of how to handle each of the situations. I really see it kind of a little bit like sports, right? You get into situations and you kind of train for situational awareness. And it's kind of the same way in business. You get put into these circumstances, you learn through experience, and then you grow from there. That was definitely the job at UL.
Yeah, exactly. And we all had to wear multiple hats, like you mentioned, being like pre-sales and sales and consultants and very technical people and helping with the testing, etc. So it was. I agree with that point, and echo that it helped us become more well-rounded for sure. So after UL, you moved on to Littelfuse, was your next home, and has been your home for quite a number of years now, and you have progressed very rapidly there. And 8 different roles, I believe. I think was the last count that I checked.
It's a running
So
joke internally. Yeah.
okay. First of all, how did you find Littelfuse? That
Yeah.
would be your next home, and how did you move about within the company itself? And
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
secrets
Great.
you can share about moving within companies and getting promoted?
Yeah, I'll touch the secrets part. I don't think there's a silver bullet but we'll get to that in a
Right, right.
second. But yeah, my journey from UL to Littelfuse it's an interesting one. So I'll go back to a comment I made before, knowing the power of your network and tapping into that network when needed. So at the time, actually, we both had this colleague. He worked at UL. His name was Will Lee. He was a good friend of mine at the time, and he had just moved into. He was finishing up his education in the business world, so he was finishing his MBA, and he really wanted to move into a less technical role, more in the a company leadership type role. And there was an opening for a standards manager in Littelfuse. So that's what we would call probably the client side of what we were doing at UL. Each customer had one person that managed all of these certification programs for that
Hmm.
company, regardless of what they're making. And that there was a position open because the incumbent was getting ready to retire, and they knew that they needed a longer term succession plan.
And may I say that person who's a standards manager, probably the most stressful job you can have, because they are, and us being at UL, the barrier between that product getting to market. So all of the pressure of the whole company, of all the products that are getting ready to be ahead of their competitors are down to that person, and then down to UL, and then out. Right. So imagine the pressure of
Absolutely.
that person.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're kind of sandwiched in the middle, so it's a very, very critical role. And actually, the
Hmm.
folks at Littelfuse acknowledge that. And that's why they wanted to go to
Hmm.
someone that was in the industry to kind of
Hmm.
be the next level of succession for that role. So our colleague had taken that role, and really quickly within the company, he built a good rapport. He built a good network, and a lot of folks were impressed with the amount of knowledge that he brought to the table in terms of standards and just knowing how the industry works between certification agencies and manufacturers. And one thing that I'll say that has fueled a lot of growth at Littelfuse, part of the company's strategy was acquisitive growth. There were a lot of acquisitions that come through as part of the company's strategy for growth. So there were new opportunities that came about for our colleagues, and they wanted to move him into a different role for one of the newly acquired product lines. And what that meant was there was a vacancy for the standards manager role. And going back to the power of the network, when you build relationships with people, they know who they would trust to fill those roles. So I got that call, and I remember at the time I was also working on a project for Littelfuse on the UL side where we were certifying products. So I had to make sure I finished that project before we could ever talk about, I didn't even know that there was this opportunity for Littelfuse. So they didn't approach me. They did it the right way. They didn't approach me until after, certification was done and we were at a clean point. And afterwards he talked to me and said, look, a lot of people are happy with what you were able to help us achieve. And we'd like to talk to you about an opportunity at Littelfuse, and the rest is history.
Very nice. And that interview process compared to the Continental and the UL process, a little bit different?
Yeah, actually, quite a bit different because at Littelfuse, we're very cross-matrix oriented. So when you're in a role as critical as standards and certification, you're not necessarily only dealing with engineering folks. You're dealing with everyone from business line managers, product managers, quality team, engineering, of course, and some other areas. So distribution team, sales, marketing, that's part of it as well. So what I had to go through was actually several rounds of interview at Littelfuse, but not to put me through the ringer, so to speak. It was more to see if my personality and my style is a good match with all of these leaders in these different cross-functional groups, because I would be in a central role where I'd have to interface with all of them, and I'd have to learn how to influence them and meet their needs and play a little bit of tug of war where, some groups may have certain needs that conflict with what I can deliver or what the standards industry can deliver. So they wanted to kind of test that out during the interview process and see, how well can he navigate through all these different functions, all these different needs of the individuals. And so I actually interviewed with 7 people throughout that process. It was quite nerve-wracking again. But by that time, I had built enough confidence in what I was doing where it felt more like a natural conversation rather than an interview. And it worked out to my advantage. I think I clicked very quickly with the team there, and it's been great since.
Gotcha. So, but before going there, you also became a licensed professional engineer. What is that like? What prompted you to do that, and how has that helped you? And what is the testing process like, if for anybody who's listening?
Sure, yeah. So it's interesting that even the licensing practice in engineering has changed quite a bit since I, started my journey some 10 plus years ago. When I was in undergraduate school, when I was at UIC, I always knew and learned of the professional engineering license and how it's kind of a good way to differentiate yourself from your peers when you enter the working profession. It's a regulated profession. Most people don't know that, but engineering can be a regulated profession through each of the states in the U.S. So Illinois has a regulating board, as do the other states. But it's not necessarily required. It's not like if you want to become a CPA, you have to get licensed, or if you want to become a physician, you have to get licensed, otherwise you can't practice. Engineering is a little more open, where you can work in the private sector without needing a license. But what I knew was if I ever wanted to go public sector, ever wanted to go for, like, say, Illinois Department of Transportation or work for the utility like ComEd, there are certain positions where you have to be licensed. Additionally, in the private realm, if you want to be a consulting engineer, if you want to open up your own consulting firm or even work for consulting firms, you have to be a licensed engineer. And that's because you may be given projects that deal with public infrastructure, deal with equipment that ultimately can, interface with the public. And that means you need to have an added level of security built into the designs. And that's something that's pretty much reserved for professional engineers. So I
Gotcha.
decided I wanted to have that credential in case my journey takes me that way. And I always felt that it was great to just differentiate myself, to show that I'm more committed to the engineering field by taking these additional, tests and taking on additional continuing education hours every time I have to renew the license. It kind of shows a recommitment to the engineering field. And that's how
Gotcha.
I ended up going that way.
And did you choose that over doing a master's
I
or
did. I did.
okay.
Yeah. For me, it was a bit
Okay.
of a personal decision.
Mm-hmm.
Master's degrees are definitely pretty valuable. But I can tell you, I was very impatient when I was in my undergraduate studies. The only thing that I could think of was getting into the working force
Yeah.
and making an impact right away.
Mm.
I was great with, educational and academia work, but I felt like I needed to learn the practice of engineering, and I knew
Mm.
it was very different. It's different reading from textbooks and learning theory versus actually applying the knowledge. And I was just hungry to apply the knowledge, and that's why I went into the working world rather than going for a master's degree.
Gotcha. And studying for the licensing test and then taking it, what was that process like? Very difficult, long hours of studying. What did you use to study in the first place? Separate materials?
Yeah, yeah. So it is a time commitment, that's for sure. I remember the biggest thing to learn at first is what is the process? How do you
Mm.
apply for this? And like anything that's kind of government regulated or run by state boards, it's not easy to to pick this up. I did a lot of reading through State of Illinois' website just to learn about, all right, what's the overall process for applying? And that's where I learned that I have to take two tests, that is, to actually get the license. The first test is called the Fundamentals of Engineering, and that's something you can take actually while you're in school. If you're close to graduation, in your undergraduate studies, you at the time at least, you could take that test. It's an 8 hour long test, and it covers a little bit of every discipline. Just because I'm an electrical engineer doesn't mean that's what that 8 hour test is all about. It covers
Oh,
everything:
okay.
mechanical, chemical, electrical, you name it. So, needless to say, it was a little bit like, in the medical world, like studying for an MCAT, but a lot more broader because I had to
Mm.
learn about some of the foundational principles in these other disciplines of engineering. So I actually took a course, an external course offered by a third party, and they offered some books that you can use as in support of the course. I probably dedicated, I don't know, in a typical work week, um, maybe 6 to 8 hours a week. So it's not a lot of time, but it's also not a small amount of time. You have to invest a little bit of time there, and preparation was key. I took a lot of mock tests as part of that course. Tried to look online for a lot of mock tests, and really familiarize myself with the content. And luckily, I was able to take it one time and pass that fundamentals of engineering.
Wow. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
So you had to put your dating life on hold for a little bit while you were doing this.
Yeah, that's right. I figured there's time for that later. I could
There's time for that
spare a
later.
few months.
Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. But that wasn't the
And
end of the journey. That actually was just half of it. So the other half of it is a second 8 hour test that you have to take 4 years later. And it's
oh,
actually after you acquire 4 years of engineering practice in the real world. It's actually one of the prerequisites when you apply to take the second test, which is the principles and practice of engineering. That one is a little more discipline focused. So if you're an electrical engineer, you can take a test within the electrical engineering discipline, but over time they even made different variants of that. There used to be one electrical engineering test. By the time I took it, I think there were three options. And the option I took was the one that focused on electronics and I think a little bit of communication as well. but there was one for electrical power, like utility grade stuff. There was one for computer science and computer engineering. So that was a little more discipline focused, another 8 hours, another course of preparation work. But it was well worth it because, again, I was prepared well enough, took the test one time and passed, got that letter and said, you're a PE now.
Wow, nice. Was there a ceremony or they have like a big certificate for you, or?
No, there's no ceremony. They just kind
No
of
ceremony.
say you passed the test. You can now apply to the state to actually get your license. So it
Gotcha,
was
gotcha,
very
gotcha.
non-ceremonious, unfortunately.
Were there practical components to it? They were like, here's a transformer, take it apart, put it back
Yeah,
together.
yeah. I mean,
Okay,
not to that level. There, it wasn't
okay.
hands-on, but they gave you a few design problems in the test. So it's
Mm,
a fully written exam. At the time, it was paper and pencil. I'm sure now it's
okay.
all computer. But they give you some design problems, and actually, some of the experience that I picked up at UL helped me. They gave us some circuits. I distinctly remember one question where they showed an integrated circuit. It was kind of like a voltage regulator. You had battery power coming in, and then at the output, they had a Zener diode, and they were asking you to pretty much determine worst case and best case clamping in that system, look at tolerances, and I just kind of jumped in my seat like, oh, this is what I do every day. I got this
Yeah, I was
one.
gonna say. This is
Yeah.
easy.
So
This is the
it's
easiest one.
easy. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. There were
Uh,
definitely harder questions too that I never
okay,
came
okay.
across, but in my practice. But it was a good variety of questions, and it really tests not only the technical skills, but just how you think. That was really what
Hmm.
the test was all about: is how can you lay down the principles of what you've learned in practice and try to utilize those to solve a problem that's somewhat unique that most people haven't come across in their practice.
And is being a PE very a tight knit, close community? Like, do you guys have conferences or meetups, etc.?
Yeah, yeah, it is a good community. I wouldn't say it's really tight knit. It's growing.
Mm,
There's quite a number of professional engineers, but I think the profession hasn't really grown to the degree that it can, and that's simply because if you're not in the civil engineering world, or maybe even in the aviation world, it's not required. So it's more of
mm,
just a desire, a personal desire, and we do have conferences every year. The Illinois Society of Professional Engineers, for example, has an annual conference every year in the summer, and I tend to go to that every year as much as I can. But there's also national conferences that brings people from all over the country together. Those are pretty big. There's a lot of people that join those, but I would say, locally in Illinois, there's probably room for growth in terms of getting more professional engineers
oh, okay.
signed up for being a professional engineer, or even being part of the community that's there, because it's important, especially if you work in the public sector or in the consulting sector. Uh, that is a pretty tight knit group, especially in the consulting sector. If you own your own consulting firm and you've made a name for yourself, you better believe that at those conferences, people know who you are.
Mm. Tim Patel, PE. Nice to
Yeah.
meet you. Is that how it
Not there
goes?
yet. Maybe one day.
Okay. Okay. So speaking of, did this specifically help you in getting that role at Littelfuse, or do you think it influenced somehow, maybe implicitly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say on paper, there may not be a direct linkage to, okay, he's a PE,
Mm-hmm.
so he's got to fit this role. But I could tell you, just in conversations with people, and the the I don't want to say the aura, but I guess the marketing that it brings to the company, that our
Mm.
engineering force also has professionally licensed engineers. I think the team at Littelfuse saw it as a plus for sure. In the 10 years that I've been at Littelfuse, I've seen more PEs joining the company. I think when I joined in our business unit, it was me and one more person. That's it.
Mm.
Now I see with acquisitions and the growth of the company, there's definitely a lot more. So yeah, on a deeper level, I think having the PE definitely brings weight, especially if we are put in roles that are externally facing, dealing with customers. The fact that they know that they're dealing with a licensed engineer speaks a little more volumes, and they tend to trust the information that we're passing along to them, and that brings trust to the Littelfuse brand. So all in all, it's a win.
So what was the first role at Littelfuse and the next one after that? What were the
Yeah.
first two roles?
Yeah, so my first role, as I had mentioned before, standards manager. So that's
Yeah.
where I was pretty much responsible for the whole business's certification projects that go through agencies like UL. And that was a bit of a change for me because before all I knew was UL. Stepping into this role, UL is a piece of the pie. There's
Mm.
also a lot of other agencies globally that the company works with to get access to different regions, different certifications. And it was more than just safety certifications. It covered things like European directives like ROHS, REACH, other types of norms and laws and standards that affect anything and everything to do with your product in all regions of the world. So it really expanded my horizons in terms of knowing how our one little fuse could be impacted by so many regulations around the world, and I found that quite interesting.
Was there a lot
Moving
of
on
travel
from there,
involved? Was there a lot of travel involved
there
with that
were
first role? Okay.
not as much as my later roles. So that in that role, the biggest chunk of travel is you get to be part of the standards technical committees, which I found was something I really aspired for. Even when I was in my role at UL, when I was in UL, you get to be the executor. You get to execute projects according to the standards, but you never really get to make the requirements. So
Mm.
that's reserved for some of the senior members of the technical community. And as you know better than I do, you have to sit in that seat for 20, 30 plus years to get any influence in changing the standards. Coming over to the manufacturer side, that all came, whether I liked it or not, into my responsibility. So not only did I have to make sure our products were certified, but I had to help influence standards that drive requirements for our products. And that was a huge part of our strategy too as a company is how can we differentiate ourselves by getting active in these
Mm.
standards panels and pushing for requirements that help us kind of differentiate our products as well. It goes both ways. You have to really bring a level of consistency for you and all of your competitors in the market as a manufacturer. But at the same time, you're trying to see how can I write the requirements in a way that can really help differentiate Littelfuse while still being fair to the rest of the industry there. So I found it like a chess game, and it really helped me develop my skills in terms of taking technical requirements and really pushing that into new needs, right? A fuse is a fuse. It hasn't really changed in decades, but maybe the applications of those fuses are changing as applications and end products are changing year after year. And that was part of my job is figure out how the fuse plays a role in next generation smart TVs, right? Electric vehicles as an example, that fuses play a huge role in those evolving markets. So it was quite a renaissance for me to try to become part of that, changing wave of technology in the industry.
So what did you have to build upon as far as skill sets are concerned? Was it more, I need to learn this vernacular a bit more, or more business strategies, or what was it that you
Yeah,
already had from your
yeah,
previous experience in college and
yeah,
then this?
yeah. So I would say what helped me in terms of having a baseline to go off of was my deep understanding of the vernacular within the standards world.
Mm.
Because as you're aware, the standards industry, it uses a set of terms, structure for standards, etc., that really is hard to interpret if you pick up a standard for the first time. You really have to know the ins and outs of how those requirements are written, why they're written that
Mm.
way. I always like to say that role, it's not the letter of the law, it's the intent of the law that you need to try to understand. And that's what I really brought to the table at Littelfuse. I had so much experience in the UL side learning about the intent and how certain standards like IEC standards, UL standards are written that I could more or less interpret why that requirement is there, right? And I was able to apply that to our technology. So that's what gave me a good baseline. But what I had to learn brand new on the Littelfuse side was kind of the business strategy side of it. Is okay, fuses are let's say in standards for LED lighting or whatever market it may be. How do I take those requirements that are favorable for us there and put it into a new industry, right? How do I put it into smart TVs? How do I put it into mobile devices, electric vehicles, et cetera, et cetera? That's where I had to learn and align more about the business strategy, why we're going into that direction, learn about how those markets are growing, and that's going to fuel our growth as a component supplier, and really put that to perspective so I can drive requirements into those end market standards. Because we're a component provider, we can master our standards at the component level, but when we bring ourselves to the table of the end product standards, we're just one voice. So you learn how to take that one voice and try to be as influential as you can.
Gotcha. Any nerves that were tackled in the beginning, or you're like, I got this. I'm good at this. I already have experience.
I was nervous because, going into the IEC groups and being just the one fuse guy out of 32 people that deal with other different technologies, it's like, no one's going to listen to me, especially when I was the youngest person in the room at that time.
Yeah.
A lot of these committees are comprised of individuals that have 20, 30, 40 years of experience at their companies. And here I am, the youngest one, just close to 7 years in the working world, tackling, creating requirements in the IEC. It was nerve-wracking for sure.
Oh man, did they not dismiss you? They're like, oh, he doesn't have a white beard. Why listen to him?
Yeah, at the time I had a little more hair than I do now, so I looked younger. But
Okay.
luckily, they were all very nice. They're very open. They like to see new perspectives, and I think having those open arms really helped. The one thing that I learned, even in my job at UL, was just try to build that confidence. Try to be confident with what you have a background in, and go in and project that confidence as much as you can. But don't do it arrogantly, right? Know that you have a lot to learn. And that's something that's helped drive me in my various roles at Littelfuse. Is every time I take a role, I know I'm starting from square one in terms of, learning the background of this specific role. But I always take it from the perspective of find the one thing or two things where you can bring value while you're in this role. What is it that's missing? What's that secret sauce that's missing in this role? Try to go fill that void. Do whatever it takes to go fill that void, and people will start recognizing it. And that's what's kind of carried me up till now throughout my career.
Yeah, so I think a few of us on the UL side remembered how technically brilliant you were, but also that you were more of a mentor without projecting that on us, that you were mentoring us or teaching us something. So we
Yep.
really appreciate that. Sincerely, I do at least. So at Littelfuse, you did the standards work, and then after that, marketing was next, or?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So most people might be listening to this to say, "Whoa, standards to marketing," and
Yeah.
that's exactly how I felt too. This was an interesting story. So I was doing the standards role for roughly 9 months or so, and as I had mentioned, part of the role was, pushing our requirements into new industries and working with sales and marketing to really position our products in a competitive way. At the time, we were building a technical marketing group within our business unit at Littelfuse, and we had a marketing communications group that handles, building sales tools, et cetera. But we didn't really have that strategic or technical marketing function where someone can really dissect applications and give the customer a value proposition of why to use our fuse or any of our other circuit protection technologies in that application. At the time, the director of technical marketing worked very closely with me while I was in standards, and he approached me as he was building his team and said, "Look, I have a need for a very strong technical marketing manager in this role." And he kind of describing this, takes me to a conference room, describes the role, and the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, what is he going to ask me? Do I know anyone that can fill this role? Because I don't know a single thing about technical marketing. Why is he asking me?
Yeah.
So he had a way. He's one of the mentors that I still work with today, but he had this way of telling you a story, bringing you along the story. And then at the end, he tells me, "I think you should fit this role." And I was just taken aback, like, "Are you kidding me?"
Sign here,
You're
please.
completely off. I was scared, actually. I told
Mm,
him point blank that I think you have the wrong guy. I'm an
mm,
engineer. I don't know a thing about marketing, because that's how I genuinely felt. I never took business classes. I took one in entrepreneurship when I was in high school, but I never practiced marketing. I don't know how marketing works. And he said, yes, fundamentally, you're right. You don't have the marketing background, but that's not what I need. I
mm.
need what I just described to you. Someone that has the technical acumen, someone that can take that technical knowledge, simplify it in a way that conveys value proposition to our outside audience. And you've exhibited all of that in your role as a standards manager. And I sat there and I thought, yeah, maybe I have, but I don't know if I could do that every day as my job. But I trusted him a lot. This kind of goes
Mm.
back to my comment again about networks. He was a senior manager in the company, director of the company, and clearly he had a good head on his shoulders. I trusted him a lot. Our GM of the division trusts him a lot. So I thought, what could go wrong, right? If he's going to take me under his wing, why not? I can learn a thing or two from him. And yeah, I was absolutely right. That was one of the most enjoyable experiences I actually had in my whole career
Oh,
thus far, is going into the technical marketing realm and working on the sales and marketing side, going to trade shows, conveying our strategic value proposition. Ultimately, that job actually evolved into a strategic marketing role where I was setting business unit 5-year strategies for for the business unit. So I learned a lot in that role, just by
holy
getting
cow.
in there
Okay.
and doing it, and getting exposed to new programs, new projects, new needs as the company evolved.
Gotcha. So you value your decision of you were hesitant at first and didn't think it would fit you, and then taking the leap of faith and then
Yeah,
just trying it out. As long as you had a mentor there to guide you, I think that was the helpful part.
that's right. Yeah, he was there to guide me, and it was a culture, and it still is at Littelfuse, where I knew if I'm going to make a mistake, it's okay.
Mm,
We all make mistakes. We learn with mistakes, but they're willing to take the risk on me to put me in that role.
yeah.
So I should be willing to take a risk to grow and push myself a little bit outside of my comfort zone, because I'll learn a lot and I'll be able to bring back value to the company. Maybe if it's in ways that I can't envision today, there will be ways that I can bring back value. And that's really what's been the true case ever since.
Yeah, I think that's the tough part when choosing companies to go work for is that you don't know what that level of risk is like. Are they okay with it? Like, can I try things out or can I fail and that's fine? Or are they like very staunch and they stick to their
Yeah.
guns and it has to be long 10-year plans before we do anything? So
Yeah.
I'm glad Littlefuse affords you that ability to do that.
Yeah, and you're right, Sherry. You can't know that really up front. I think the only glimpse of that you may have is during your interview process. And I
Mm,
could tell when I interviewed with those 7 individuals that I mentioned earlier, I could tell that the fact that they put me through that many rounds of people and that cross section of folks within the company and my conversations with each of them, I could tell they had an open mind, right? They were willing to learn and adapt as the business needed to, and hear things from different perspectives, hear things from a guy like me coming from the standards world, as a distribution director who works with electronics distributors like, DigiKey, Mauser, Aero Electronics. They may not know a thing about standards, but the fact that they can talk to me and understand how my work can help them sell more product really helped them kind of put together the vision of how important this role is. It really helped me portray the value that I can bring, even as a standards manager, to the company. So you never
gotcha.
know that
So,
until
yeah.
you get to talk to people.
Yeah, but individually, you have to have this inside of you, this innate ability to be able to take risk, and when you see an
Yeah,
opportunity to go for it.
yeah,
And that's not something
absolutely.
we learn in school. I mean, that's just something you have to come with, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, that's the one thing that I would recommend to anyone that wants to
Mm,
advance in their career. Put that pride aside. That's something that I had to learn early on in my career, and just take those risks, right? Don't take the safe route. Find opportunities where there are gaps in the company, something that you think you can help fill, even if you don't think you can do it 100%, take that risk, take that shot. Almost like being an entrepreneur. You're being an entrepreneur for your own career. Take the opportunity. The worst thing that can happen is you don't do so well. You can go back to what was your bread and butter. Yeah, unfortunately, it may not be or it could be in the same company, but there's always foundation that you can fall back upon. But if you don't take those opportunities, you probably regret it. You won't have the opportunities to grow beyond your comfort zone.
Yeah, you know what, Tim? Like in recent years, because of COVID, perhaps, and maybe some other types of issues that have arisen, people are practicing quiet quitting. So I'm not sure this advice would directly jive with them, because if you are of that mindset, then it may not work. But I do know a lot of people who are, and those who aren't as well. And it's totally up to them. It's their decision. But I guess that factors in as well. Like, how much are you willing to risk to advance your
True,
career?
true. Yeah, and it's a personal decision, right?
Yeah,
One thing that I've also learned throughout my career is my needs for my career adapt as my personal needs adapt too,
yeah,
right? What I wanted in my career 10 to 15 years ago
yeah.
is different than what I can afford to do today. So everyone has their own personal journey. So you're absolutely right. It just comes down to where you are in your career and what you're willing to with risk.
And so, what are your thoughts on in general about hybrid work or remote work?
I'm actually a big fan of it. I think throughout the last, oh gosh, it's probably close to 4 years now, almost 3 full years after the impact of COVID. But I feel that a lot of industries, ours included, has proven that a certain level of remote work or hybrid
Mm,
work, can still be effective, can still be meaningful, can still result in good, significant business results. Sometimes we go through these periods of market change, like we do
mm,
currently, where certain markets may be on the downtrend, but it's not because, I would strongly say, it's not because of too much hybrid work or remote work. Sometimes there are broader market forces, geopolitical activities that occur as well that drive markets up and down. But overall productivity, I would say, has been fairly good, fairly consistent. It goes through
mm,
cycles up and down,
mm,
but to me, just the resilience in people right when the original shutdowns, in 2020 started, and
mm.
people, putting in extra time actually
Yeah,
to work from home and make sure that business continuity remained even in times of immense uncertainty. It's proven that if people are fully aligned, remote work, hybrid work can work very well, can work to our advantage sometimes even, where we can be more connected globally through different hours of the day rather than punch in, punch out, depending on what time zone I'm in. Um, it can also backfire on us too.
mm,
Sometimes you get people that are in roles that really need to be hands on. Engineering
yeah,
is one of those where it's kind of a hybrid. There's times where you can definitely be remote and work behind your computer screen, but then there's times where you need to be in the lab or at the manufacturing floor to
mm,
actually be hands on and see the work, see the process. And I think having flexibility and knowing that you need to be flexible in those situations is the most important. Don't be too rigid where you absolutely refuse to go into an office setting, but at the same time, make sure that you're hard enough where you can plan out the times that you need to be in the office or at the factory, and don't let it consume you, right? Try to find the right mix and be as efficient as you can. I don't believe that being in the office every day makes you the most efficient, right? Both sets of working environments can bring it about its inefficiencies. You really have to find what works best for
yeah,
you
yep,
individually, and I'm a big proponent of that.
for sure. And if the company that you're at now doesn't afford that ability, there's always options of other companies that may.
Yeah.
And going back to your Littelfuse career, so we talked about two roles so far: the standards and then marketing. So what happened after marketing, and why did you leave marketing?
Actually, a lot of my roles within Littelfuse did not come when I asked for them. It actually came when the
Oh,
company had a need for it, and that's something that I've been very fortunate of in my career at Littelfuse. So after marketing,
I
I
think you're being
mentioned,
too humble. You're just a superstar, and everybody
uh,
wants you. That's what it
no,
is.
no, no.
You're the
There's a lot
Jordan
of
of this stuff,
superstars.
the Jordan of electrical engineering.
I wish. I can't jump as high, that's for sure. No, but in all seriousness, a lot of these opportunities came when, as I mentioned, the company evolved, and that's one thing I love about the company that I'm at today is the evolution is consistent. It's constant. We learned that actually in our days at UL. The only constant is
Mm,
change. That's definitely true in a lot of companies, and it's true at Littelfuse. So every time there was an opportunity for a new acquisition or a need to bolster an effort within the company, I was fortunate enough to be one of the names in the hat. So I built enough of a network internally
mm,
of people that trusted the work that I did, liked what I brought to the table. So they gave me opportunities. So, for example, moving from the marketing role, it actually evolved from technical marketing to strategic marketing, as I mentioned. And at that time, we had made an acquisition. It was actually a carve out of a business from TE Connectivity. We took their circuit protection technologies. They're known for polymer PTCs, positive temperature coefficient uh, products. So those are basically resettable fuses, as they're kind
mm,
of called in industry. They're resistors that are resettable and serve as circuit protection devices. When we did that, we had a restructuring of our management team within our business unit, and I had a new boss. And that was kind of the theme at Littelfuse. Every time there's a change or growth, you kind of get new bosses. But I never saw that as a negative. That was
mm,
also another opportunity to show someone else where you can bring value in the company. So my new boss at the time changed kind of the title of the company and kind of the strategic role of the company from just technical and application support in the marketing side to more broad stroking strategy development for our
mm,
products. So he wanted to really evolve our team to the next level. We are building the strategy for the business unit. It was kind of a void within our business. We had it covered through a few different roles, but there was no one key team really putting together the 5 year, 10 year strategy for the business. So I was given that evolved role to strategic marketing manager, and I was assigned a few markets like the home appliance market and building automation and Internet of Things market. And I was able to build some product line strategies behind that in a couple of years worth of work. And we saw some tremendous growth. And that was really what fueled my next step, which was go run an acquisition, which was
oh,
actually one of my most defining moments within Littelfuse. It was a relatively small company that we acquired in the summer of 2017. It was a company called US Sensor. They were based in California, and they made a line of temperature sensor products, NTC thermistors, PTC thermistors, and some RTD devices as well. And they were basically prepping me to be the business manager for that line of products. And my first step was go run that integration because you need someone from the Littelfuse side to make sure that every function has an activity and a game plan to integrate the people, the processes, the technologies into our
wow.
working operations. So I actually moved to California. Not a bad place to be. I was moved to California for about a period of 6 months doing that integration. And on the personal side, it was a little challenging because you had kind of joked earlier about dating life. I had just
Yeah.
met someone in Chicago, and
Oh,
relationship was starting to get serious. And here the
oh,
company was telling me move,
oh.
move to move to Orange County. So I actually managed that remotely. We made it work, but that
Oh, okay,
was
there you go. Remote. Another plug
we
for remote remote
another
work.
plug for remote. Another plug for remote. We made efforts to see each other every weekend. It worked
Nice.
out nicely.
Hybrid. It was
But yeah,
hybrid.
it was hybrid. It was a great example of if you put the effort in, you can make it work, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
So you
So
ran
that
the
was
acquisition.
that's right.
Oh
Yeah.
man. And how crazy was that? And how long did it take to finish?
Yeah. So that was probably the craziest role that I ever had. It was a real taste of, for all of you that want to become a general manager in your life, that was the real taste of being a general manager. Even though it was a small company, the amount of visibility you have into every piece of the business is extraordinary. That company actually ran everything through its prior owner. So I had to kind of fill that void and become that pseudo owner for a temporary short period of time until we got the right functional leaders to actually own some of these key decisions. So every little thing was coming to me, big things like, hey, this supplier is not going to be a strategic partner for us anymore. We got to quickly find a new supplier, down to this person's got this parking spot in the parking lot. I wanted that spot. Yeah.
Oh.
Everything came to me.
Did you have like a team at least that you could delegate tasks to?
I had a team.
Like you take care of the parking problem, I'll do the supplier.
Yeah. We had a small team, but this company was a bit unique, I would say, in that it was a mom and pop startup shop, right? So the people there, they've been working there for 30 plus years. That was the only working life that they've ever had. Some of them didn't really have a lot of formal professional training. So, a lot of times you deal with things at a personal and people level that you may never have to deal with in a larger corporation. So that taught me a lot about being a people manager, actually, because it was really the first time. In my prior roles, I managed a small group of people, but this was the first time where I don't directly manage people, but I was responsible for all 70 people at that site. So every little problem that they had, a lot of times, if they had disputes with managers or managers of managers, it would have to come through me. And I was empowering people. That was the one thing that I wanted to bring change to culturally. There is, you used to go to the owner to solve everything. I want you guys to try to solve it, right? Think about what's the right way to address the issue. If there's additional challenges or big time decisions that need some spending from the Littelfuse side, then involve me. We're going to have to talk about that. And that was nice because a lot of folks that maybe never had a boss in the 30 years that they worked at that company that empowered them finally felt like, wow, I actually have a voice now. I can do something. And it worked well. Some others crumbled, but most people really embraced that.
Was this your first managerial position or not really?
Not technically. So I was a manager in the standards role and the technical marketing role. I had only a couple of individuals that reported to me, but this is the first role where I wasn't a direct manager, but I influenced the whole business. So my arms can touch the dials of pretty much every part of the business. And that is pretty daunting when you think about it, because there's a lot of decisions that come your way. And I would say that's the role that really taught me about how to make quick decisions. You won't always have all the data available. Everything you learn as an engineer, I had to kind of throw out the window to some degree, because yes, as an engineer, you want all your decisions to be perfect. You want all the data to be perfect. If something doesn't line up, if you have an outlier in your data set, you don't want to move forward, right? What I learned in this role was that's life. That's going to be business. You're going to have outliers here and there. You got to use the 80-20 rule, right? You got to spend your time on the things that will really move the dial, and there will be uncertainty. Take the risk, right? Take that risk, because if you don't, you might fall behind. Your competitors might get ahead. Your business might not get ahead. You have to take that leap. That taught me a lot on the leadership side. Is you don't always have the data available. You just have to trust the information your team is giving you, make the right logical decision based on your past experiences, but also make mistakes as you go along. You will make mistakes. Just don't repeat it. Don't do it over and over again. Learn from your mistakes.
So not always time to measure twice and cut once. It's perhaps cut first and then measure. Yeah,
absolutely. Sometimes it's just cut first and live with the consequences. It's not to say to be reckless. Definitely don't be reckless, but over time, just build the confidence and build a system of people around you to be trustworthy, so that more often than not, you're making the right decisions with only 80% of the information available to you.
And looking back at that now, how many decisions do you think you got correct? If you can self-evaluate, was it 80-20?
That I got correct or that I got
Yeah,
wrong?
got correct. 80 correct,
uh,
80% correct.
I'd probably maybe like between 60 and 70% correct,
Okay.
the rest
Okay.
incorrect. Yeah, I'll be
Okay.
honest. There's a lot of decisions that I did not make that were correct. But one thing you learn in the business world is you get opportunities, but then sometimes those opportunities will come back in different ways. So it's not always the end of the world. Um, you have to keep your eye on the long-term vision, and I think that's what separates good companies with good strategies versus those that are just short-term and short-sighted. Is if you keep your eye on the long-term vision and strategy, you'll make the right decision. It may not benefit you today or tomorrow or next year, but 2 years to 5 years down the road, you'll see the benefit. That's what you should always be trying to drive, at least culturally and strategically.
And this leadership prowess that you have developed or developed on the job or it was always in you, did you have to hone that further? Like classes, talking to people, like how did that come about?
I had to hone it a lot. I didn't do any formal classwork, actually.
Okay.
I probably could have. I've done a few outside courses where I look at like finance for
Mm,
non-financial managers, kind of some technical skills, tactical skills. But when it came to like, learning how to communicate, how to make decisions, it was really more just trial by fire, I'd like to
okay.
say. It was really putting me into those roles. And like I mentioned before, luckily at Littelfuse, we have the culture of, leadership
Mm,
supporting you. They put you in that role so they don't want you to fail. That's one thing I learned quickly is they won't put you in that role to make you fail. So have that confidence, know that in the back of your mind and go out there and execute. Because if things go wrong, yeah, you may not have a good time, you may look bad, but learn from it. Show that you've learned from it and move on from it. And you really learn through experience that way. That's the best way to capture this in a fast, rapid environment.
that's awesome, man. So just progressing down the timeline about that role that you had that you were just describing, what happened after that? Were there a couple of more roles after
Yeah,
that?
yeah, there
Okay.
were a couple more roles. So I did that integration activity for about 6 months. We got it to a point where
Mm,
the business was stable. We had all the business processes, the customer facing sales order management side of it all figured out. It was translated into our enterprise resource planning system that we use within the company. We had the whole work processes set up between our customer service, sales, etc. We got the product line set up with our product managers so they could run, profitability reports. They could get all the data about the customers, regional mix, all that good stuff. So I was pretty much done. The only thing that was left was figuring out some of the um, marketing pieces in terms of how to get data sheets updated to our
mm,
brand and that kind of stuff. So it was all tactical stuff, things that teams behind me could execute. So our GM came to me and said, you're kind of winding down on this process because the integration manager is a very strategic role. You don't need to be involved in all these little functions. Otherwise, I can tell you going through that role, integrations last forever, right? There are companies that we've acquired 20 plus years ago that still have, some elements of their old company because you need to keep
mm,
those sometimes. So integrations are kind of a constant evolution. So you could be if you thought that was your job, you could be stuck there forever. That's not
mm.
the point. The point is you get the big foundational things done and then you let the business take it over and really evolve it over time. So that's where we were. My general manager comes to me and says, there is a cross business unit effort going on right now. And it's an interesting story because it's for a very dynamic market, one that I mentioned earlier in our talk here. It was for the electric vehicle market, which was growing quite rapidly. So this was probably around late 2017, early 2018. The market was growing. And internally within Littelfuse, we do have a business unit that's focused on automotive, but
Okay.
there was a lot of content coming from all businesses within Littelfuse that went into the automotive industry, the electric vehicle industry specifically. So, for example, there were high voltage, high power fuses that did not exist in the automotive portfolio, but were built by the industrial team for utility type work. All of a sudden, the electric vehicle industry needed those capabilities, but now in a car. Or vice versa, on the flip side, all of the low voltage, low power electronics going into the car, like ADAS systems for automated driving and assistance systems. Those are using a lot more CPU,
Mm.
MCU, computer processor type devices. They have their own power supplies, they have their own circuit protection, they have their own semiconductors in them. Again, not covered by our automotive business, but covered by our electronics business. So somebody need to kind of put that together. And it wasn't just for the vehicle at the time, it was also for the infrastructure that goes with the vehicle, specifically to charge the EVs. So there was a big need for the EV charging market. Companies that make the home chargers, AC home chargers that
Mm.
you can buy, or commercial grade DC fast chargers. There's a lot of our content that was going in, but no one was kind of coordinating the efforts strategically and looking at all the opportunities that we have globally. So they needed someone to be the business development manager, cross business unit. And of course, my name was in the hat once again. So
Your name was the only one in the hat. There was no hat.
I was actually quite shocked when our
Mm.
GM came to me and said, "Look, the automotive team wants you to help run this cross business unit project." And I was so excited at the time. I thought, "Wow, this is probably the most exciting market that we can talk about at the time at Littelfuse. It's just electric vehicles overall and being part of that journey." So I jumped on it, and it gave me an opportunity also to work across business units, which I know is very important, especially at our company, if you wish to elevate into further leadership roles, because a lot of times we have people that stay in one silo, in one part of the business, and they never
Mm.
get to see how the business overall operates and how diverse we are across our business segments. This was a great door opening for me to actually go in and see how the other divisions operate, build influence with the other divisions, build a network of people that I can trust within the other divisions, and really get my name out there in front of the executives of more than just a contributor to the one electronics group that I worked for. So it was a great opportunity for Littlefuse, opportunity for Tim. It was perfect.
Nice, man. Was that the last role, or is that the current? You're currently global R&D. Was there something before
Yeah.
in between
So there
those?
there was one more role. It's
Okay,
been a
there you
long
go.
journey. I like to say I have career ADD within Littlefuse. But there was one more role, and that after I did that EV charging business development work, which was a shorter period of time than I thought it would be, but I really helped craft the 5-year strategy for all the businesses there. They actually asked to take all of that work and absorb it into the businesses, because I made it very clear, here's the strategy, here's how each of the businesses need to execute. So the GMs of all the businesses said, it's time for us to own it now and execute it. So you did your job well done, time to move on. What that meant for me was I needed a new home. So what I was actually offered was, again, I came from the electronics world. I built a very good rapport with the GM of the electronics business. He needed someone to really stabilize that temperature sensor business that I had previously left. Because what happened in that period of time when I went to the business development role for EV charging was we made some moves in terms of our operational footprint on the temperature sensor side, and we had some hiccups along the way, and we needed to get that business back to a stable point. And there was really only one person who at the company knew the ins and outs of that business. So they asked me to come into a global product manager role for that temperature sensor line. So this was the first time I got to really fully own a profit and loss for a product line, profit and
Oh,
loss statement for a product line. Yeah, it was a big deal. It was a big deal for me. I had to learn quite a lot about all the levers you can pull to drive the P&L statement. I learned a lot by trial by fire because that product line was struggling. We were we were going in a reverse direction for quite some time. We had a pretty stumbling move in terms of our operational footprint. So I needed to get it back to stability, and I need to bring some continuity to the business. So I learned the hard way. Many, many long hours, a lot of stressful days and nights, but I really learned again what it feels like to be a GM of a business because product management, at least in Littelfuse, it's different in every company, but at Littelfuse, you really are the mini GM of your product line, and practically everything runs through you, all key decisions, kind of like the integration manager role that I mentioned before. But this time you own the P&L statement. So if things aren't looking good, you're the one in the hot seat. So I learned a
Oh
lot
man.
through that period of time. It was very stressful.
Were you not doing that when you were doing the integration portion of it for the acquisition? Were you not doing P&L then?
I was doing only a small portion of that because we actually
Okay.
had another person that was brought
Okay.
in as the product manager slash business manager. So I was
Oh,
more focused on integrating the systems and
yeah, yeah.
processes while
Makes
the other
sense.
person owned the P&L. Yeah,
Gotcha, gotcha. And so how was that P&L experience? Are you done with that now
it's
or are you
great.
it's still going on?
I'm done with that. I'm done with that
Okay.
now. It's not that I didn't like it. There were definitely elements of the job that I didn't like, but I learned a lot about the difficulties of managing a business. And I like to joke with my wife. I learned a lot in that role that helps me understand Shark Tank a lot better now. When they're asking about valuation, when they're asking about margins, landed
Gotcha.
costs, that was all I did for product management. So it was a great financial acumen learning for me specifically, but a lot more than just that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So this financial literacy that you had to tack on the existing pyramid of Tim Patel, what was that like? Again, how did you
Yeah.
learn all this? Was it classes, self-taught? What's going on?
Well, I would say it's mostly trial by fire in the job. You're kind of forced to do it because we have monthly uh, profitability reviews internally with the general
Oh,
manager of the business. So you're kind of asked a lot of deep questions. So you know when those meetings are coming, and you kind of do some background work before that to really figure out why the numbers came out the way they came out. But I also tried to do some formal training with our VP of Finance.
hmm.
He's really down to earth guy. Actually spent some time to go through a P&L of one of our product lines and explain to me what are the contributing line items that go into each of those lines in the P&L.
Hmm.
It's a little different at every company, so you need someone kind of internally that works in the finance team. Our person was from the FP&A group, Financial Planning and Analysis group, so they're the ones that report to the CFO, kind of the forward-looking forecast for each of the quarters. So he really gave me insight into what each of those line items for the P&L means. But what you really learn is when problems arise, like for
Mm.
example, at the time, there was a lot of expenses due to tariffs. And if you recall, back in 2019, 2020, China tariffs was a huge topic for the industry. And my product line suffered tremendously,
Oh,
actually, from China tariffs, because those are costs that we would have to absorb when we bring product from China to, let's say, Mexico or the US. The way we're doing logistics, you have to pay tariffs when you go through each of those boundaries. And even more so when I sell to customers, if I'm building a product in China and selling it to a US customer, I have to actually pay the government the tariff for bringing that product to market in the US, but I have to make a key decision on how am I going to absorb that cost?
yeah.
Am I going to take all of it? Am I going to pass all of it on to the customer? Am I going to absorb some of it? And you make some decisions, and you find out in implementation, maybe it didn't go exactly the way you thought it would. Maybe
Mm.
somebody screwed up in terms of putting the system into the ERP system, so it didn't bill the customer the right way. And you find these holes as you go along, and you realize, okay, there's a lot to this intertangled web that you may have not known about. I learned a lot about trade compliance that year.
Oh
I was
Lord.
able to learn about
Okay.
things about duty drawbacks if you paid the wrong duties, um, substantial transformation rules, which it goes into some details a little bit like standards about, how do you determine the country of origin of a product? It's
Mm.
not as simple as I built it in China, believe it or not. There's a lot that goes into it. It's where you add value. You may have some products that start off in China and then go to a different factory in a different country and then end up in the US. there's a lot I had to learn about what I can apply to determine the true country of origin for that product. And that all ties to tariff, what I get charged and what I charge my customers. So a lot of
Gotcha. So
insight.
interesting. So speaking of supply chain specifically, blockchain technology was supposed to help part of it, where you could know where the origin was, where it moved through, and like as a
Yep.
ledger, immutable ledger. Do you think that has been implemented in certain industries, or that's still ongoing and will take some time?
I think it's been implemented in some industries. It's probably a long ways away, and it helps from a transactional basis. You know, when I'm issuing a purchase order and I'm paying that purchase order off, it helps from that standpoint. But everything deeper than that, in terms of moving product from region to region, and moving different forms of
Mm,
product from raw material to semi-finished good to finished good. I think the principles of blockchain technology could be used, but it's just so much more complex. It's not a financial transaction. It's really more of
mm,
goods movement, where
yeah.
I think there's could be more work to be done in the industry. It's definitely a complex problem, and it tends to get more complex as borders tend to open up more and more, and supply chains tend to diversify more and more.
And on the tariffs, I think that was introduced during the Trump administration. Does that still
Yeah,
continue on? Is it still in present day? Those still exist for the China tariffs, as they
it
were
does.
called?
It does, yeah. There are different sections of products. I think at the time what we were dealing with was Section 301 tariffs. So it's a laundry list of products that fall within that. Electronic products are just one of thousands of products that fall in there. So I do know that at least a part of our products still fall within those tariffs, even under the Biden administration, and they probably will still fall
Yeah,
in the tariffs in the long term. It's just a continuity of geopolitical relationships with
yeah,
each of the regions.
understood. So this is not the position you have now. This is the one that was right below it, right? The global
Right before
product
this.
manager,
That's right.
right? So
Right
now
before
then
this.
you move into global R&D. So how did that
Yeah.
come about?
Yeah. It's a
Again,
very, very,
drawing a name. Okay,
yeah. No, no, no. This one was different.
okay,
This one was very
okay.
different. So it's a very unconventional path. So most people might be listening to this and seeing that, okay, he's going down the route of, more business
Hmm.
leadership within the company. And I certainly feel that my place at Littelfuse ultimately is somewhere in the business leadership, the business side of the company. But I was at a point in time where I felt that we were bringing some stability to that temperature sensor business, and there were a lot of operational parts of that product management role that I just really didn't like. From the financial standpoint, we had a finance team, but I felt like I was spending too much of my time working on accounting based stuff rather than what I went to school for, to really, hone my knowledge and bring my skill set up front. So for me personally, I felt that it was drifting too far from making a business impact, and I was becoming more of a spreadsheet reporting type person within the company. I coupled that with a few personal changes that I went through in my personal life. I was just expecting my first child at the time. So I felt that, this isn't the right mix of company responsibilities and personal responsibilities at this time. I needed a different change. I wanted to go to something that was a little more of my bread and butter in terms of electrical engineering and more technical knowledge, which I used in my technical marketing roles and beforehand, even in my EV charging roles. And I needed to pretty much have a better long-term vision of, where can my leadership take me within the company.
Hmm.
Do I really want to run just this temperature sensor product line, or do I want to go to a bigger piece of the business? So with that all in mind, there was an opportunity open internally for another succession plan. So if you recall, I first came to Littelfuse as a successor for the standards manager. Now there was a need for a successor for our Fuse R&D development team, the leader of our development team. And this is the person that I actually currently work for. So he has been with Littelfuse for 30 years. He's one of the few people that remain at the company that has knowledge of fuse design for products ranging from 30 years ago. And it's not
Wow.
just for our electronics business is for all businesses, automotive and industrial. So he's the only guy in the company that really has that broad sight from an R&D perspective of why each of our products were built that way. And he has
Mr.
so many
Fuse.
patents.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
Mr. Fuse. He's got so
Yeah.
many patents under his belt.
Yeah.
They need someone to be the next Mr. Fuse.
Okay. All
So
right.
I felt like, wow, this is a great opportunity, once in a lifetime, really, to jump in and be that trainee underneath this guy's wings and really learn about fuse technology and have a clear path of engineering leadership ahead of me.
Mm.
Because I know once this guy moves on, I get to be the lead, R&D director, and then move on to, VP of engineering, etc. There's a path that could be open to me should I stay in this path.
And if
So
he's
I
listening, he
found
may be like, I'm not moving on, Tim. Keep dreaming.
No, actually, that's the one interesting thing at Littelfuse. Again, they're also thinking about the future. So
Okay.
they sold it to me this way as well, in that,
Mm.
there are opportunities for you in the future if you come to this team, because obviously they're not going to invest in training me to be the Fuse guru if
Yeah.
I'm not going to ultimately lead the Fuse
Mm.
team and bring some value to other parts of the business, being the leader of the Fuse team. So that's where I'm at today, and I love it. I've been in it for about 2.5 years. It's bringing another element of leadership to me, more technical leadership on this side, but also cultural leadership, because most of the team that I lead is located in Asia, specifically in the Philippines. So I'm dealing, I've always dealt with different cultures while I've been at Littelfuse, but now the bulk of my direct reports are in another country, completely different time zone. So they work while I'm sleeping and I'm awake during the day. So we have to kind of adapt our schedules so we can have
Mm.
some crossover. I'm used to taking a lot of night calls these days, but it works out for me because I can build that part of my competency, the technical side of the fuses, and really building rapport within the technical community, within our CTO community at Littelfuse, also building the cultural rapport as being a manager in the US, but also managing a team in the Philippines, building great cross-functional relationships because my folks work at the plant in the Philippines, so I have to operate with the plant manager and all the plant operations staff in the Philippines. So I visit them quite often on trips, and again, building that network because that leads to future growth. And just to touch upon the bigger piece of the business side, our electronics fuse business is the biggest piece of the
Mm.
Littelfuse business overall. So it gave me an opportunity to make an impact on a
Wow.
large piece of our business as opposed to a smaller piece of our business. So there's some responsibilities that come with that, but the growth potential is opened up to much more. So
That's
I'm
amazing,
enjoying it and
man.
I look forward to more.
Yeah, we always like a few of us at UL always knew that you were meant for bigger and better things, and we're all happy where you are now and things that
Thank
you
you.
look forward towards. Um, so I wanted to ask you, in towards the end here, that what do you see coming up from your point of view in electrical engineering specifically, as far as what does the future hold? Is it just more
Yeah,
smaller things? Is it more wireless technologies? Is it where's it going?
yeah,
And
that's a great question.
one more follow up on that is where do you see the use cases of uh, uh, VR and XR for manufacturing specifically that you think that Littelfuse in the future or companies like it can adopt?
Great questions. Great questions. Yeah. The field of electrical engineering and just engineering in general is rapidly evolving. And I know people say that all the time, but I strongly feel that the
Hmm.
15 plus years I've been in industry,
Yeah.
it's really rapidly evolving now. And where I see the biggest evolution is alternative energy. I kind of use the term of alternative energy, not necessarily renewable, but people are looking at ways of taking traditional fossil fuel based energy systems and converting them to electric systems. We call it electrification of things sometimes. So a good example is vehicles, right? Combustion engine vehicles turning into electrified vehicles where using large DC voltage systems, large battery packs, lithium ion battery packs sitting in the vehicle, taking what used to be 400, 500 volts, now 800 volts, creeping up to 1,000 volts DC, taking that much power and utilizing it to propel a vehicle as well as run all the other systems on the vehicle. These are new architectures in the electrical engineering space, because if you think about it, all the technologies and all the protection that comes with those technologies really is built on the premise of alternating current. All of these technologies, specifically utilities, even circuit protection like fuses, most of the products out there were perfected and built for AC systems, high voltage and low voltage. Now you've got this subset of products that are using high voltage DC systems. And you can see a lot of industries are trying to rapidly evolve. There are very few high voltage DC fuses in the world, very few high voltage DC contactors. There's been works in the last 10 plus years to make those, but before that, there weren't really many. And even down to cabling systems, safety systems, connectors, everything operating at high voltage DC is really brand new. It's even driving innovations at the material science level. There's new plastics, there's new polymers, there's new arc quenching materials for fuses that are being developed basically to handle this new set of requirements, this new power levels. So I see a lot of rapid evolution there. EVs are just one piece of the pie that I mentioned. There's photovoltaic systems, solar panel systems. They've been around for years, right? They've been working at 1,000 volts, 1,500 volts DC, but there's more and more of them coming out now. They're not just restricted to solar panel farms out in the middle of nowhere. They're being built into microgrids. They're being built locally into infrastructure. And with that comes battery energy storage systems. Think of the battery pack in the car, but make that a 10 times, 100 times scale, a large container that has battery systems with uninterruptible power supplies that back up those battery systems. Those are all operating at high voltage. Wind turbines also incorporating energy generation and taking that wind energy, converting it to electrical energy, but transmitting it in the form of DC or storing it in energy storage systems in the form of DC power. So there's a lot of evolution going on there all the way down to the material science level. So I see a lot of effort in industry going in there.
Gotcha.
On the electronic side, I think you'll always see miniaturization of things.
Yeah.
That's always continuing, and that's also material science. So we see that in our products as well. Specifically, the fuses that I designed, they're more board level. So there's a lot more about how can I make the product smaller but handle more energy. That's really our overarching theme in the electronic space: more power in a smaller package. And you see that in power systems like data centers now. Those servers, computer systems used to be the size of conference rooms, right? Now they want to condense all that computing power into one server rack. So there's a lot of technology that goes into that, and power systems play a huge role into driving this technology.
Yeah, even GPUs now, some of these cards are just massive and they require so much heat regulation, etc. Totally understand that part. And my follow-up to that was, where do you see the role of AR and VR playing into specifically manufacturing? Maybe CAD as well, but maybe both. Where do you see that play out in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's really hard to predict because the possibilities are almost endless. But I can tell you one area where we've looked at it, even internally at Littelfuse. Sometimes we look at opportunities where we can't physically be with one another. Let's say we have to run a set of tests in one laboratory that's halfway around the world, but the engineer, or even if we're doing safety certification, the third-party safety agency needs to witness those tests. How do we do it in an effective, cost-worthy way? And we're trying to utilize tools like AR and VR to help people see on the other side of the world, what's going on in terms of the test setup. How can we modify things on the fly? You may not have technicians in a certain test cell. Sometimes we deal with large amounts of power. It's unsafe to bring people into those test cells. So having, robots perhaps to take up the test setup and tear down or even modify some of the parameters, and you control it remotely. this is where I could see tools like AR and VR being very useful. I can also see it being useful on the sales side. Um, Sometimes it's hard to visualize some of the products that we make as manufacturers if you don't always have samples with you. Excuse me, or you may not be able to see how the product may fit into an end application. I can foresee applications being built into AR and VR tools where you can actually see the integration, at least from a design standpoint, when we're talking to designers of equipment, how our fuses, contactors, relays, how all of those can actually integrate into their system without having to generate a 3D CAD
Yeah.
model on the spot, right? They could put on a set of goggles and see what it looks like. Will the size meet the constraints of the design or whatnot?
Gotcha. And on that same vein, I've also seen a lot of AI and ML play a good role in manufacturing, specifically for quality checks. So where you can have a camera be pointed at, and it knows what good looks like when a board comes off or a product comes
Yep.
off the line, that it can check to see this passes a quality check or something is missing. Do you see that playing a bigger role going forward in your industry specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. You're on point, Sheriar, because I mentioned the electric vehicle industry and just the
Yeah.
automotive industry in general. The quality requirements in those industries are usually top notch, probably second only to aerospace and those types of markets. But those requirements for quality, the only way to really implement the right levels of checks and processes is to utilize some of these tools. I mean, in the past, we've been able to use automation to a certain degree, optical systems, et cetera, but they still rely on some level of human touch. And as you scale up in volumes in some of these industries, it's just not going to be practical to have, an operator sitting there looking at images, x-rays, whatever it may be. So some of these systems like AI and VR tools, and specifically AI tools for vision detection systems, I think is a good market to be in, because I see more and more industries. I mentioned automotive as a starting point, but we can see even in our industry, there's industrial type customers and other customers in other markets that are trying to adopt those principles of automotive grade quality levels into their work. And that means more and more proliferation of AI tools. So I definitely see it in the quality world as being a very helpful tool.
Awesome. Me being in the IT industry for a little bit now, I've also noticed the power that AI and machine learning can play, especially when you're doing software engineering. I'm wondering how that'll play out in the physical design of fuses, for example, and other electrical components, where these could be used as aids. And when you have a great idea that this could be closer to market, where you can get this down and finished in a very more productive way and with high quality and high degree of confidence, and then off to the machine
Yeah,
lines. I think that's a lot of exciting stuff coming up. I'm pretty
absolutely.
sure. In closing, Tim, I've been researching you a little bit, not just for this podcast, just in general. I like to keep up, and I found a video of you that I want to share, and I want to have your
Uh-oh.
take on it. This is from Littelfuse when you were probably one of your previous roles when you were there. So I just want you to take a look at this. Let me share the
Sure.
screen. Let me know when you can see it. There we go. You see that?
Ah, yes, I remember
Okay.
this.
So, and I like the meta of this, where it's a trifecta of Tim Patel's. There's one on the TV, there's the news reporter, the weatherman,
That's
and
right.
then there's you on the screen. Do you
That's
remember this
right.
at all?
Absolutely. I remember
Okay, got
this
it.
like it was yesterday. Yeah, this is at Electronica in Munich, Germany, one of our trade shows.
Yeah.
With
There you
Littelfuse.
go.
I'm here to talk to you today about
The camera work
building
is a
and
little
home
off.
automation segment, which includes the IoT, the Internet of Things.
And this is what you were
This
talking
is
about,
a really hot
IoT, right
topic
here.
in the industry
That's right.
today. You see a lot of buildings
Very
and
cool.
homes
So
becoming
I
automated.
just love this
Lots of
video
cool
because you
Yeah.
were
features
like
to
so on
understand
point, so
how you guys
polished.
can get.
And I was like, man,
Well,
this
I
guy knows his
appreciate that.
stuff.
I was thrown a little bit off because I was staring at a monitor of myself in another video. But yeah, I think it came out nicely. I put a lot of
Yeah.
effort into this one. I actually designed the booth here too, so I remember
Oh,
picking out
okay.
those specific applications to call out. So having
Really?
the
Yeah.
opportunity to present it was the cherry on top.
You go through the whole thing. You go through the thermostat, and then the cameraman zooms in at the main board, like people are gonna know what's on there, and then and then they move forward to the bigger pieces of pie here. But yeah, interesting video, man. This was done. Let's see, this is say 6 years ago.
This was probably 2016, probably something like that, 2016 or 17. Yeah.
There you go, man. Awesome.
Yeah.
On TV.
Fun times. You dug out an old gem. Yeah, that's a great video.
There's an older one when you were doing marketing and you were going through showing Hall effect sensors and read sensors.
You found that one too. Yeah.
It was all about magnets. I was like, I think Tim is selling me magnets here.
I was at the time. Yes. Just give me a product to sell. I could sell it.
Tim, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being on. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I appreciate it. It was an absolute honor to talk to you. It's been too long since we've connected. I was so happy when you reached out and wanted to do this. So I'm glad to share my story. Hopefully it inspires folks that are listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.